What's going on, guys? It's Nick here, back with another fantasy football video. This is going to be a continuation of the mini series that I'm doing, Fantasy Football Fact or Fiction. We're going to be kind of looking at things that the community as a whole maybe takes for granted, talking about if it's true or not, and then talking about what we can use the information for. So these are things that I've done studies on, and I'm sharing the data with you now. I've written an article on it if you want to see that instead, or even on top of this, just to kind of maybe a different way of presenting it if you want to read it more. Check that out on our website. It's 100% free, thefantasyfootballadvice.com. Go there. The link is in the description below, but thefantasyfootballadvice.com. This one's the passing league narrative, and I'll talk about what the myth is that we're trying to look at in a second, but the passing league narrative is different from how we use it in fantasy. So the narrative is just that it's a passing league now. And I'm going to show you here. You can already see it on the screen. And it's true. Like the league is shifting more towards the passing game, away from the running game. There are individual teams that are implementing a more run-heavy approach, but as a whole, the team is shifting towards the pass. You see it right here. It's extremely clear. There's some charts I'm going to show you in a second where it's not even close to as clear as this, but look at the trend line. I mean, it's got almost a 40 slope, and you can just see it. There are seasons where the number one scorer, back in 2000 was hovering around where like the middle of the pack is. Like it's just crazy what the shift is, and we're going to be talking about what this means in a couple slides coming up, but it's clear. Passing yardage is up. What's also clear from the next chart I'm going to show you is that rushing yardage is down. How did I get these? Minimum 200 pass attempts for the passing yardage, and then a minimum of 100 rushing attempts for rushing yardage. I wanted to isolate out injuries because, yes, they're part of the game, but they don't help us in this study. Telling us that a guy got 10 carries doesn't tell us anything. Like maybe he's just a scat back. Maybe he was going to be good and get a lot of carries, but he got hurt, and those carries went to someone else. All we want to look at is the performances of the guys who actually mattered. It doesn't matter if on a trick play some guy threw 25 passing yards, so we should count that in the data. That is not helping us in discovering if it's a passing league or not. So we just want to look at, from the people who mattered, where's their production. We're going to be looking at different numbers in a second, but that's where I got the data. It goes back to 2000. You guys have heard me say it before. That's the only data that I have is back to the year 2000. If you want to see that, I'll put an annotation on the screen, or a card on the screen, because I can't do annotations anymore. Put a card on the screen. You can check out a video I did on how I gather all this data. It's 100% free. RotoViz screener. I show you exactly how to use the Excel portion of that, exactly how to set things up and how to look stuff up. It's a great video. It doesn't have a lot of views. It really should, because it's so easy to look some of this stuff up, and it's completely free. So I don't know why more people don't do it. But you can see here, passing yardage is up. This is the picture for rushing yardage. And minimum of 100 carries. Again, I want a player to be involved, and you can see it's down. This again is another clear one. Like I'm going to talk about in a second, some of these charts, it's really hard to see what the trend line even is. But -9 for the slope, it's just super easy to see. Rushing is down. So we have confirmed the obvious. It's a passing league now. The reasons for that, I mean, it's just there's rule changes. There's teams look up to the success of teams that are winning, and they try and implement strategies that mirror that. There are some teams that are implementing a run-heavy strategy, but if they're not winning, okay, what do the winning teams do? What are the Falcons doing? What are the Patriots doing? What are the Packers doing? Like, look at the teams that are scoring a lot of points and copy them. So it just logically, it makes sense. What does this mean for us? Well, I think that the myth that I'm trying to either bust or prove right is when people apply that to fantasy and they say, okay, the game is shifting away from the run. There are very few running backs that are getting workload carries or workhorse carries. There are very few 3-down backs. Teams are implementing more scat back strategy. The James Whites, the Deion Lewis, those kind of guys are on more and more teams. So since it's getting harder and harder for me to hit on a workhorse running back and they're scoring less points, they're getting less yardage, maybe I should be taking wide receivers high. And then you look at it and you say, oh, well, there's more passing yardage. That has to go generally to the wide receiver. That means people are going to post monster wide receiver years. So I think that's the myth that I'm trying to bust, is the game shifting away from the run more towards the pass. So the value of a running back is going to decrease. I don't want running backs early. I'll take a running back late, since they're not doing that great anyways. I'll just take a scat back to get me some PPR points. And that's what we're trying to prove, is should you be doing that. Now that's a lot like what the RB0 strategy is. There's a lot more to the RB0 strategy, in mainly the injuries and the difficulty in predicting, I guess, the usage of running backs. Because remember, it's a fact that it is more difficult to predict the season-long usage and numbers of a running back as opposed to a wide receiver. You can be pretty confident in how wide receivers are going to be used. You have no idea generally how running backs are going to be used in an offense come the end of the year. Week to week, it flips. That's why you see David Johnsons and Bells and Zekes and all these stud running backs so expensive in DraftKings, because week to week, we can predict pretty much how running back's going to do with pretty solid accuracy. It's just that from a season-long standpoint, it's so much harder to predict the running back position. Week to week, you don't really know wide receivers. That's pretty hard to predict how a wide receiver is going to be used. But over the course of a year, it's easier to predict. So that's the mentality kind of behind RB0, and I'll be going over that in full detail in the RB0 video. That's not what this video is about, but this is just one of the thinking, or one of the points in the RB0 strategy, is that it's a passing league. I want whoever's getting the more yardage. Since wide receivers getting more yardage, I want them. So that's what we're trying to prove. How are we going to do that? A number of different things we're going to look at. So this first chart is the total points from the top 40 wide receivers in PPR scoring going back through 2000. As you can see, generally it's going up. Another thing you can see is, like I've been saying, 2016 was an aberration. It was a down year. The trend is up, and then all of a sudden, like you're going to see in other charts as well, 2016 just tanked. Like, the top receivers just ended up tanking. That's just how it is. It was a down year. It was an aberration for both the running back and the wide receiver positions. But you do see that as a whole, you hear me say that, as a whole, the wide receivers have seen more points. So they are getting more points. Yes, it's just, where are these points coming from? As you're going to see in this next chart, it's not from the elite guys. The elite guys are posting the elite numbers they always have been posting. Honestly, it's kind of shocking to look at. But on average, with a cutoff of 40 receptions, PPR points by year, these are the individual performances. Each one of these dots is an individual performance in PPR scoring. It's actually on the decline. In 2000 to now, there's on average a decline. There's up and down years, yes. But look at the bulk of where things are. Like, look at early on, it's a little bit spread out. Look at last season. There's a massive bulk in the middle. So this basically shows that it's not that quarterbacks are passing these extra yards, because remember, we did prove that quarterbacks are throwing for more. It's not that they're hyper-focusing on their number one. It's not that all of a sudden Mike Evans is going to get 3,000 receiving yards. It's that receiving backs are more part of the game. Tight ends are being used more. They're throwing to the slot receivers. They're throwing to number twos. So maybe number ones are getting a little bit more points, but it's overwhelmingly being made up by the replacement level guys. And that's essentially the point of debunking this. It's the replacement level guys that are seeing the extra points. It's the number twos. It's the slot receivers. It's the guys that you can pick up off waivers who are becoming more and more valuable. This next chart, showing the number of wide receivers who are meeting this threshold. So remember, I said the threshold was 40 receptions, because that's just how we don't get skewed data. Literally every single year since 2000, because that's all I have, it's going up and up and up. More and more and more and more receivers are becoming fantasy relevant. So it's a big thing that we saw with quarterbacks. Why do I say take a quarterback late? Well, because in the past, you needed a top guy to win. because the difference between the top guy and number 12 was massive. Well, not anymore. The difference between the top guy and the 20th guy isn't even that massive. So the replacement guys for quarterbacks are getting closer and closer and closer to the top guys, to where they're literally within 1 or 2 points per game different. Well, the same thing's happening with the wide receiver position. There's more and more and more guys who are relevant. Guys you can get 40, 50th in your drafts for wide receivers. Like 50th wide receiver are relevant, whereas in the past they were completely irrelevant. So you needed a stud wide receiver. You don't entirely need that anymore. And I posted a video last week about just testing out the RB or the wide receiver zero strategy, so not taking any of the elite wide receivers. And yes, it was in a 10-team league, which I don't think are very competitive at all. I prefer 12-team leagues or maybe in a 14-team league. But the strategy was completely viable because the first 4 picks I did were running backs. I was locking up some running backs, and then all of a sudden you're in the 7th and 8th round, and I'm picking guys like Diggs where I'm thinking these guys are like 5th and 6th round values. Guys like Diggs, guys like Crabtree, guys like Crowder, Tate. These guys are going in like the middle rounds, and it's just, they're nearly just as good now as some of these 2nd and 3rd round picks. I mean, what's really the difference between Demaryius Thomas and Stephon Diggs this year besides 3 or 4 rounds? What's really the difference? Is it much? I mean, can you honestly tell me that you're convinced Demaryius Thomas is going to have a better year than Diggs if they both stay healthy? No, you can't tell me that. So that's basically what we're looking at with this strategy. I'm showing you another chart here. This one's just basically showing you the total points from the top 20 wide receivers, and it kind of backs up what I'm talking about in a few different areas. I mean, one, look at last year. Don't think that wide receivers are going to dud like that again. Wide receivers dudded last year. And I'm not talking about just the guys you were taking early didn't do good. I'm saying look at the top 20. They didn't get many points. So there's going to be a huge shift towards the running back this year. Probably an overcorrection. I'm saying there needs to be a correction in the ADPs of wide receivers last season. But there's definitely going to be an overcorrection. Right now it hasn't entirely happened. I think come drafts, and I said this last week, that there's going to be 7 running backs drafted in the first round if you're in a 10-team league. So top 10 picks, I think 7 running backs and 3 wide receivers. It's not even close to that right now. I think it's like 5 and 5. But I think running backs are going to start going earlier because people look at last season, they just get scared, and recency bias is going to basically take over. But really look at it, and there's a slight upward trend from 2010, but it's really not that big of a change. And the biggest change is what we saw in that previous graph and what we're going to see in this next graph, that it's the backup guys that are getting the massive increase. So this one right here was top 20. Now we look at wide receivers 21 through 40, and it's pretty clear. I mean, even in a year, again, where the top guys tanked, if you had wide receivers 21 through 40, there really wasn't that much of a difference. Each and every year, from 2009 on, 21 through 40 are becoming more and more and more viable. So you can really see where I'm going. The myth that you need a top wide receiver because it's a passing league and you got to lock up an Antonio Brown, a Julio Jones, and Odell because they're going to get you a monster amount of points. That's not a real thing. I know a lot of you don't believe in that, and you're going to let me know in the comment section below that, oh, I knew that was going to happen last year. Listen, no one knew that was going to happen last year with wide receivers dudding and running backs just taking off. It's very, very difficult to imagine that we're going to see all of the stud running backs pay off again this year. And with more and more questionable running backs being drafted in the first round, I have a very strong feeling that there's going to be an overcorrection this year, and then some of them are going to tank, and then there's going to be another correction for the following year. I think it should be 5 and 5. It should be basically split running backs and wide receivers, because there's no way in the world that the top 3 wide receivers can be taken in the second round, and for people to be taking even definitely Melvin Gordon, but Melvin Gordon, if Ajayi, if Jordan Howard, if these guys are going, DeMarco Murray, even Freeman, if they're all gonna end up going towards the first round, like there's just so much risk with those picks, and that's why I am an advocate for an RB0 strategy. And if towards the end of the summer it is a viable option, right now it's still optimal to take one of DJ, Bell, Zeke, McCoy in the first round. That's still the optimal strategy. Then to see what's there in the second round, just the best available player for me, and then to try and load up on running back or wide receivers in those middle rounds. But if a ton of running backs are going early, and we're seriously getting like Odell and Julio at like 7 and 8 picks, and we can get Green and Evans and those guys to back up with them, there's no way we can't do that. Just this last one, it's percentage of each range that represents the top 40. So blue is top 10 wide receivers. 11 through 20 is this like orange color. The gray color is 21 through 30, and then 31 through 40 is the yellow. And it just backs up everything I've been saying. There's a slight downward trend for the points, or the percentage of the points represented through this upper half. So of the top 40, there's an increase in the percentage that the bottom half of that, so 21 through 40, they're becoming a larger percentage of the points, whereas each year the top half, 1 through 20, are becoming a smaller percentage of the top 40's points. So if you didn't understand, like go back a minute and just listen to what I just said again. It'll make sense. And or if you want to check out the article that I wrote, it'll make sense in that. But essentially, you want middle round wide receivers for a few reasons. Less injury risk. They are producing closer and closer to the stud guys. And it's easier to predict wide receivers over the course of the season. And if you can lock up a running back early that you can predict their usage for, then you're building a safer team. This was not debunking RB0. This was not an advocate for wide receiver 0. This is just showing you that, yes, it's a passing league. Yes, teams are running the ball less. That does not prove anything from a value standpoint. If anything, saying that there's less and less stud running backs from a scarcity standpoint means you need to lock up, like I've been a very large advocate for, the top 4 running backs. DJ, Bell, Zeke, McCoy. From a value standpoint, if you lock one of them up and they don't get hurt, remember that's why RB0 is a thing, they get hurt a lot more. If they don't get hurt and you lock them up, that's a much higher value to your team than locking up an AJ Green. That is the end of this video. I hope you enjoyed. I hope you appreciate the time I put into these videos, because it is not easy looking all this stuff up and writing these articles and making these charts and putting these videos together. So I do hope, if you watched this far, you will smash that like button. If you didn't like the video for some reason, let me know why in the comment section below, and I will try and address that. But that's the end of this video, and thanks for watching.